That night, everything changed. Everything. It was a warm summer evening, just like any other. A gentle breeze slipped through the window, softly moving the curtains. The house was quiet. My parents were in their bedroom, and my brother Jake was out with his friends. I, as usual, was in my room reading a book, or at least trying to read. But that night, even the air in the room felt different. It was as if something was about to happen, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what. Jake returned home around midnight. I heard the door open and close, followed by footsteps. But that night, he didn't go straight to his room as he usually did. He paused in the hallway, then gently knocked on my door. "Lena, are you asleep?" he whispered. There was something strange in his voice. Normally, Jake would barge in with his usual confidence and start talking about something. But that night, his voice was soft, almost fragile. "No, come in," I said, setting my book down on the edge of the bed. The door slowly opened, and Jake stepped inside. He was still wearing the t-shirt and jeans he'd had on earlier. His hair was disheveled, and there was a kind of restlessness in his eyes. He walked in, closed the door behind him, and sat down on the edge of the bed. "Is something wrong?" I asked, a sense of unease creeping into me. Jake stayed silent for a while, his hands clenched between his knees. Then he slowly lifted his head and looked at me. There was a kind of helplessness in his eyes, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. "Lena," he began, his voice trembling. "Lately, something's changed between us. Do you feel it?" My heart began to race. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but something inside me was stirring. Jake and I had always been close. We were twins, raised in the same house, sharing the same memories. But this was different. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. Jake hesitated for a moment, then slowly reached out and took my hand. His touch was warm, but it also sent a kind of electric shock through me. Something inside me was awakening, though I couldn't quite grasp what it was. "I don't know," Jake said, his voice low. "But everything between us, it feels different. Like there's more to it." At that moment, my breath caught. Jake's words echoed in my mind. More to it? What did that mean? We were siblings. We had always been that way. But now, as I looked into his eyes, I could feel that something had changed. Something was different. "Jake," I whispered, my voice barely audible. This isn't right. We're siblings." Jake shook his head, his eyes filled with a kind of pain. "I know, Lena, but I can't ignore these feelings. I love you differently." At that moment, the air in the room shifted. It was as if everything had become more intense, more real. Jake's hand was still in mine, and his touch was no longer just a sibling's touch. Something inside me was awakening, a kind of pull, a kind of desire. But this was wrong, wasn't it? "Jake," I repeated, this time more firmly. "This isn't right. We're siblings." Jake closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "I know," he said again, "but I can't control these feelings. I love you, Lena, not just as my sister." At that moment, a heavy silence fell over the room. My heart was pounding, and I didn't know what to do. Jake's words kept echoing in my mind. This was wrong. But why did it feel so right? "Jake," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. This shouldn't be happening." Jake bowed his head and said nothing for a moment. Then he slowly stood up and walked toward the door. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "I shouldn't have told you." He opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. I sat on my bed, my heart racing, watching him leave. I couldn't sleep that night. Jake's words kept spinning in my head. This was wrong. But why did it feel so right? The next day, Jake and I avoided each other. I avoided making eye contact with him, and he didn't try to talk to me. But that night, my door was knocked on again. "Lena," Jake whispered from behind the door. "Can we talk?" When he came in, there was a kind of determination on his face. "Lena," he said, his voice stronger now. I can't ignore these feelings. I love you, and I know it's wrong, but it's not my fault. At that moment, something inside me broke. I could see the pain in Jake's eyes, and I couldn't bear to see him so helpless. I slowly stood up and walked over to him. "Jake," I whispered, tears in my eyes. "I love you too, but this isn't right." Jake shook his head. "Right or wrong, these are my feelings, and I don't want to lose you." At that moment, something inside me unraveled. I sat down beside Jake and placed my hand in his. "I don't want to lose you either," I whispered. "But this is hard." Jake rested his head on my shoulder, and we sat like that for a while. That night, everything changed. There was no going back. But maybe, just maybe, this was a new beginning. Maybe we could learn to live with these feelings together.